All right, y'all. Welcome. We're so excited that you're here. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm so excited to introduce to you this morning our guest speaker, John McHugh. We met John kind of accidentally at an event that we were hosting, and it just worked out so amazingly that he had all this experience that he can join us with and to share all that he's learned over his years of work. So you can see from our slide about John that he's worked as a registered lobbyist for large nonprofits in two different states, worked in two different North Carolina governors' offices, worked with legal and medical technology supports, oversaw tons of federal funding, and liaised between state, local, and federal governments. And he lives here in Cary, North Carolina, and has an absolutely gorgeous, stunning dog. And so we're so excited, John. Thank you for joining us and for collecting all this information for us about what lobbying and advocacy looks like with the General Assembly here in North Carolina. So, y'all, thanks for coming. Welcome to John.
Well, thank you, Katie. Hello and welcome. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully not mess that up very much. Let me see. Okay. So everybody should be able to see that now, right? Can I get a nod or a yes or something to make sure that
Yes.
everything's good? Okay. So hello and welcome. Uh, I don't do lobbying anymore. I've done lobbying I've been involved in policy for about 25 years. Now I work for a medical learning company. So, in that vein, I've established some of our learning objectives for today's presentation. So hopefully if I do my job correctly and you listened, by the time this presentation is over, you will be able to explain what advocacy is and what an advocate does and how advocacy works. You'll be able to identify and articulate some of the important steps in the legislative process here in North Carolina. And you should be able to list methods of advocacy and explain why they are effective in getting your policy positions across. So we've gone through most of this already. My name is John McHugh. I have been involved in policy in North Carolina since 2001. I've worked for Governors Easley and Perdue in their legislative office, and then later on in some more boutique offices that dealt with federal grant funding. Um, and from 2018 to the end of 2024, I was the lobbyist in North and South Carolina for the ASPCA. That's why I have my LinkedIn picture has my dog on it. It made a lot more sense when I was an animal welfare lobbyist. So hopefully I can share some of my insights working in the General Assembly for since the turn of the century, which makes me sound very old. I appreciate that. So when you talk about lobbying, this is kind of the popular conception of what people think of when they think of a lobbyist. It's some sort of weird loophole in the law that allows for legalized bribery. That, if somebody were to give a legislator a big bag of money with a dollar sign on it in their office or in a back room or in a bathroom, which actually happened in North Carolina, unfortunately, that would be illegal and there would be serious consequences for that. But if you were to filter that through an intermediary, that would be a lobbyist, that would be fine. Um, and there's the old saying that there are two things that if you love, you should never watch being made, and that is law and sausages, because it will depress you and destroy your heart. But honestly, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, not terribly. Um, and I appreciate why people have a negative view of what lobbying is. And this is why every conversation I used to have when I was a lobbyist had the same sort of shape. It was, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm a lobbyist. Ugh. For dogs and cats. Oh, because that was considered to be an okay use of the power of advocacy. And that's kind of a shame because lobbying is really one of the few professions that is directly uh, described by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. You see that last section, the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for the redress of grievances. That is effectively what a lobbyist does. A lobbyist is somebody that is representing a group of people. Sometimes that's people, volunteer advocates like yourself. Sometimes that's a corporation. Sometimes that's a special interest group that are petitioning the government. In this case, we're talking about the North Carolina General Assembly for the redress of grievances, which is whatever it is that they feel like they need to change or modify or remove. Um, so, excuse me. When I was with the ASPCA, my job was to make North Carolina better and South Carolina better for animals, and so that's why they uh, hired me to do that. And I want to take a minute now to discuss some terminology because I'm going to be using lobbyist and advocate sort of interchangeably through the course of this presentation, and I want to be clear what I'm talking about. So a lobbyist is actually defined by North Carolina statutes. It's in NCGS 120C, and it's effectively somebody who's either hired on a contractual level or employed by somebody for the purpose of influencing or modifying policy. And there to be a lobbyist, you have to register, you have to do certain things, you have to maintain records. Um, but all of the things I'm going to talk about when I talk about being a lobbyist is also applicable to being an advocate. It's kind of a sharks versus fish thing. So all sharks are fish, but not all fish are sharks. So everybody who is a lobbyist is an advocate, but not everybody who's an advocate is a lobbyist. So if I talk about one or the other, when I mention lobbyist, I mean somebody who is being paid to do that, who is a professional who generally gets to spend a lot more time and effort focused on the job of advocacy. But that doesn't mean that advocates aren't important or advocates can't be useful. Some of the most powerful advocates that I knew when I was working in the General Assembly building, either as staff to a governor or as a lobbyist to a nonprofit, were people who were just there consistently to do the work. One of the legislators, in fact, that I used to use to introduce legislation when I was a lobbyist, started out as a citizen advocate before becoming a legislator. So I don't want to short sell your ability to do this work if you're not being paid for it. So, so what exactly, now that I've brought this up, what exactly is advocacy? So, in the most ideal form, this is what advocacy is. So, it is just drawing attention to a problem or redress of grievances. And a baby screaming is sort of the platonic ideal of what advocacy is. That this baby is advocating for its own needs. It's your job to figure out what those needs are and fix them. So, is the baby hungry? Is the baby tired? Does the baby need to be burped? Does it need a diaper changed? This is a very effective method of advocacy because each and every one of us is hardwired by evolution to care and respond to a screaming baby. Now, this is a little less effective um, when it's an adult because if I stood in the middle of the General Assembly building and screamed, no one would feel obliged or compelled to come and ask me what my problem was and see if they could fix it. They would probably just ask me to leave or probably more likely ask the General Assembly police to come and ask me to leave. So, but when we're talking about advocacy, it's important to remember that this is a very universal situation, and there's a bunch of sayings about this, like open mouths get fed or squeaky wheels get the grease. It's the person that actually comes up with the thing that they want to do, what they want to change, and has an idea of how to change it are the ones that are going to get the attention and eventually going to get the action. So when you're an adult, this is a much better way to approach how advocacy works and how to conceptualize it. Now, ideally, these things would be in motion, but I couldn't figure out how to get the GIF to work with three wheels. So, an advocate, which is our blue gear here, are the drivers of change in a democratic system. And if you want to think about this, all these gears are always going to be in motion. This is a perpetual conversation between an advocate and the public and a legislator. So, and I want to mention here that this is a little bit of a conceptualization of this process. So when we're talking about the interaction between advocates and the public, I'm going to refer to that as messaging, because the goal of an advocate is to shape conversations around a specific topic. For an individual, that's the bullet points that were mentioned at the beginning, their values and goals for this organization, which is to improve human rights and elected representation. So an advocate is always an advocate. If they're talking to somebody, no matter who they are, they should be carrying the message of what the organization is. So once an advocate uh, shapes that conversation with the public, that sentiment gets bubbled up to legislators who hear from their constituents that, hey, there's a problem here. This is at the point where the advocate interacts with the legislator, and we're going to call this policy or policy work to provide them the solution to the problem. So the advocate is always trying to shape a conversation with the public and then provide answers to the legislator in terms of policy about how they can address the issues, the conversation that they've shaped with the public. It's important to remember that these aren't hard and fast rules, right? When you're talking to the public, you're going to need to include elements of your policy because that's how you shape the conversation. That's how you want the conversation to go. And when you're talking to the legislator, you're going to be using the lessons that you know about how effective messaging works when you're talking to them, because you want to have clear, concise, and understandable communication. Um, I want to take a moment here to talk about the how to be an effective communicator. I'm going to get to that a lot later in the next slide, actually. It's something I like to call being a message warrior. So you want to always be available to answer questions. You want to always have the capacity to engage with someone, to talk to someone. That doesn't mean you have to engage with somebody who's obviously acting in bad faith, but you want to have the presumption of good faith and the presumption of somebody who's always there to be receptive to your message, because that is actually how you affect change. You talk to somebody, you normalize a subject that you want to talk about, a policy that you want to see enacted, and that way you work from a bottom-up system. Our system is designed from the outset to work from a bottom-up way. So the people want to see change. The people let their legislators know they want to see change, and you provide the change to the legislator. In Platonic ideal terms, this is how advocacy works. So let's talk about how messaging can be effective. So advocacy, as I mentioned, is just sharing your views on topics. Um, and you use your messaging to highlight the need to change for a specific subject. And an effective advocate is going to adjust the way of talking or their way they think about messaging, depending on who the audience is, what the medium you're messaging in, or what the goals of your messaging are going to be. Now, for example, this is a picture of the No Kings protest that happened in DC. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I have a little bit of allergies today. Um, Now, I want you to notice that there are a lot of messaging going on here in form of signs. Um, this is one of the good things and bad things about a protest. A protest is there to make sure that your voice is heard and that people understand how broad-based your support is. Specifically, a problem with something like No Kings, and this goes back to, say, Occupy Wall Street, is there's not a coherent message involved. You can see all of the signs that are all great, they're all clever, and they're all important, but they're not reinforcing a single message. This isn't necessarily bad. It's okay to just discontent is itself a message. So, but there's no way to have a coherent policy message involved in a protest like this. So while this is a very good example of, excuse me, this is a good example of a protest message, but you can't really bring this and say, these are our policy goals. Now, contrast that with, say, a Moral Monday event. which are based around very coherent policy goals. We want a budget. We want that budget to support the disabled people or education. Some of the most effective protests and messaging in United States history was during the Civil Rights movement. And there you had a lot of very coherent messaging that was going along with the show of support that was the protest. You had in segregation or fair housing or like integrate schools. So those are examples of really effective policy messaging that goes along with sort of messaging in general. So neither of these things are better or worse than the other. It's just worth considering um, when you're doing supportive messaging. You want to make sure that your policy considerations are coherent and represented in your voice. So, what is policy? So policy in very broad terms is effectively a decision that's backed by an official authority. So no shirt, no shoes, no service. That's a policy. The restaurant will ask you to leave if you show up and you don't have a shirt and or shoes. So the authority there is the ability of the restaurant to ask you to leave. The policy is you have to have a minimum amount of clothing to enter in this restaurant, this facility. So in this context, what we're going to be talking about, since we're talking about the North Carolina General Assemblies, we're talking about laws that are going to be passed by the General Assembly. And advocates, when successful, are going to specifically support or oppose those laws through messaging and most importantly through building relationships. Excuse me. When I was a lobbyist, I used to say that the measure of success or failure of my abilities as a lobbyist is not necessarily whether I could get bills passed or bills killed. The measure of success was if a question came up and a legislator was unsure about the answer, if they called me, that's what winning looks like. That's building a relationship where somebody trusts, where a legislator trusts to give them the correct answer. So all of these things, when we're talking about messaging, when we're talking about delivering policy, at base, what we're talking about is building a relationship with somebody. And everybody here is really good at building relationships. So all you have to do is take those skills and apply them in the context of this formalized rulemaking authority. So, um, obviously, in building that relationship, you can talk to the legislator about whatever you'd like to. They're your representative. You find the person who represents you, whether it's the House or the Senate, or somebody who has you might have a willing to talk to you because you have similar conceptions of how General Assembly should work. You can talk to them about anything, but really you want to focus on during that relationship building process are the policies that you want to see changed. So these are just sort of things to keep in mind while you're talking about things. So with that in mind, let's talk about the General Assembly itself. So the General Assembly is made up of two chambers, the House and the Senate. The North Carolina House is the lower chamber. It has 120 members. The North Carolina Senate is the upper chamber and it has 50 members. The lower and upper chamber is sort of a holdover, conceptualizing it that way. That really doesn't have much of an impact on day-to-day operation. Usually when there is a budget, the houses swap off every 2 years about who introduces the budget. That's usually the big difference between the upper chamber and the lower chamber is who introduces the budget. That doesn't matter in North Carolina. They just switch off. So the difference between the lower chamber and the upper chamber is just the membership. Every member of the General Assembly serves a 2-year term. Everyone's up for election every 2 years. So it's not like the federal system where House of Representatives is a 2-year term and the senators are a 6-year term. Every member of the General Assembly is up for re-election every 2 years. So remember that. This is why they're sort of perpetually in campaign mode. So in terms of party affiliation, they're overwhelmingly Republican. There is a supermajority in the Senate. There is one seat shy of a Republican supermajority in the House, although the membership has changed quite recently, where you have two newly independent members, which throws the balance off quite a bit. Um, that has been the result of the primary process. It's a relatively unusual thing in North Carolina. It's not unheard of, but having two independents, I think, is um, that's new. That's certainly I can't recall a time when there have been we've had party switches in the past, or Republicans or Democrats who've been decided not to caucus with the rest of their parties, but I don't remember a time when we've had two actual independents. So the average age of a member of the General Assembly is about 57 years old. It's 70% male and 73% white. So in general, the General Assembly is both is older, it's wider, and it's more conservative than the average North Carolinian. North Carolina is 60% white, and only 18% of the of the North Carolina population is over 65. It's obviously 50% male, 50% female. And in terms of partisan representation, North Carolina's kind of settled out, I think, to about a third, a third, a third, a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third unaffiliated. For the record, I am also an unaffiliated voter for boring and professional reasons. So when we're talking about the General Assembly, it is a representative body that is largely not representative of North Carolina as a whole. This is for a bunch of different reasons. Some of which is that North Carolina, unsurprisingly, is the worst of all possible worlds when it comes to how the General Assembly is supposed to function. It is the North Carolina Constitution was written in the 70s, but it's effectively the same as the Constitution that was reconstituted during the Great Depression. It's the idea is that it has a very weak executive and a very strong legislature, but that legislature is designed to be a part-time citizen legislature. It's only supposed to meet 3 or 4 months out of the year. Over the last decade and a half, that's changed. So effectively, the General Assembly is a full-time position that is designed to be part-time. So the only people that can really afford to do that are either already retired, independently wealthy, or are effectively paid by their employer to be a member of the General Assembly. So as 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there were a lot more lawyers, there were more doctors, there were more actual professionals that were members of the General Assembly. Now it's effectively generic businessmen, and businessmen is almost always men, or people who are already retired. Um, I think this has had a negative impact on both the operation of the General Assembly and their the conception among the population. So let's talk about laws. Uh, this is actually from the General Assembly Legislative Library. Obviously, this has not been updated in a while. It's a little bit out of date visually. This is the handout for about how a bill becomes a law. So this is kind of visually chaotic, and I don't find this particularly helpful as a schematic. The important parts are that bit at the start, the concerned citizen group, organization, state agency, or legislator suggests legislation. Unlike some states, only members of the General Assembly can introduce bills that become laws in North Carolina. The second most important part is the yellow bit and the blue bit, that's the House and the Senate, respectively, have the same process. So I'll go through this in a second, but remember that the bills have to go through the same process in both chambers. Whether or not a bill is introduced in the House or the Senate, that doesn't matter. Um, but so I'll explain sort of how I would do this when I worked as a legislator. I always drew up my own language because I didn't trust anybody else. So if we wanted to change a law, I would draft a bill that's in the format that they would like, and I would give it to my sponsors. That's the most important thing, is identifying who's going to sponsor your bill. When I worked for the ASPCA, we always had a policy that every bill we introduced would be bipartisan. So I needed to find a Democratic and a Republican member to sponsor my legislation. So that was always kind of a fun challenge. But I would draft up my legislation, my language, and I would shop it around and find people that would be interested in introducing it. At that point, it goes to bill drafting. And bill drafting, there's always a negotiation process with bill drafting because they want things done their way and I want things done my way. So once we settle on the language, a bill is introduced. Once a bill is introduced, there's a period of time, it's usually about a week, for that allows other members to sign on as co-sponsors for legislation. This is good and bad um, because sometimes you get really good co-sponsors, sometimes you get really bad co-sponsors. You don't really have any control over that process. Um, every bill has to be introduced, and the Constitution requires a handful of things about every bill. That is, a bill's got to be read 3 times in every chamber, and to be ratified, the same version of that bill has to be agreed upon by both houses. Now, what this means is first reading is literally just that. The clerk reads the title of the bill on the floor of the House, and then it gets referred to one or a number of committees. That's that big square bit at the top there in yellow. And that's really the most important part. The committees a bill goes to, committees are subsets of the General Assembly that are organized by topic. Um, that is where all the work is going to be done. The members of the committee are going to review, they're going to potentially amend, and they're going to vote on the bill that's introduced. That bill is going to go to the floor if it passes out of committee. And 90% of the time, if a bill comes out of committee, that's the version that's going to be voted on because the floor is usually going to take the committee's recommendation on to pass or not pass a piece of legislation because the committees are considered to be the experts on the topic of the bill. So if you have a bill that deals with, let's say I had a bill that dealt with how judges deal with people convicted of animal cruelty. That bill is going to go to a judiciary committee because that's the committee that deals with judicial matters. If I had a bill that dealt with a local government matter, it's going to go to state and local government. If I had a bill that has to do with taxes, that's got to go through finance and then appropriations. So typically, a bill is going to go through at least two and probably at least three different committees before it winds up back onto the floor. So, what is that going to look like? So, this is an example of the committee page on the General Assembly website. And as I mentioned before, when you're as a lobbyist and as an advocate, the bulk of the work you're going to be doing is working with the membership of the various legislative committees to make sure that your bill uh, gets through. There are no objections to the bill because there's typically you want to have all the members of the legislative committee to have consensus on the piece of legislation that they're voting on. So let's say I mentioned that there's a bill that has to do with say sentencing on animal cruelty laws. So this is the Senate Judiciary Committee. Um, I would look at the membership of this committee and I would say, hey, look, we've got 2 members from Wake County on this Judiciary Committee, Senator Batch and Senator Blue. That means I could tap people who are in Wake County to call up their legislator and say, "Hey, I really want you to support John's bill. I want the bill to go through. I don't want it amended. I want the language as it is." So, as a lobbyist or as an advocate, your job is to do outreach to these members of the committee, look at their voting histories, understand where they might stand on this piece of legislation, and go talk to them and say, "Hey, this is what I really want to do. This is why I want to do it. Do you have any questions? Have you heard of any concerns? Is there any way I can address any issue that might have come up? If there's a problem, if you need an amendment, let's go talk about it because I would rather draw the amendment than have somebody else draw the amendment and make sure that everybody is in alignment on this committee about this bill." Now, you can't control everything, but you can control as much as you can control. So, you got to talk to the chairs of the committee to make sure that you know when the bill is going to be calendared, and whether or not they think the bill is going to pass. And then you go down to the membership and you talk to the individual members of the committee, see if anybody's brought up any concerns. Um, this is really where the committee system is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of getting a piece of legislation passed or a piece of legislation killed. The opposite is if there's a bill that's going to be in a committee that you don't like, you go to those members and you say, like, I really think this is a problem. I really don't think you should vote for this. These are the reasons why I don't think you should vote for this. And maybe we can change this into something better, or we can change it into a way that addresses my concerns. But this is where you're going to do the bulk of your work as both an advocate and a legislator in order to affect policy change is during the committee system. So I'll tell you in a minute how to find out what committees the bills that you're concerned about are going to be in. So after that, after the bill comes out of committee, it's going to go to the floor for a final vote. Now you can, and this photo really brings home the older, wider, and more conservative nature of the General Assembly, right? So um, it's a little bit cheating because this is a photo of the right side of the chamber. Um, every bill's going to have two different, after first reading, there's going to be second reading and third reading on a bill. Both those happen on the floor. You can provide amendments. Floor amendments do happen, but they are extremely rare. And for the most part, the chamber is going to vote on what the recommendation is from the committee. So, excuse me, when a bill comes to the floor, the whoever's presiding will ask the member to stand up and speak on the bill, and the member from the committee will stand up and say, we recommend that the chamber vote for or vote against this bill. And then uh, they'll have the period for voting. Voting happens, the machine gets locked, and the vote total gets recorded. Most everything is either up or down vote, 50-50. There are a few procedural things that require 60 or supermajority votes, but for the most part, um, once it gets to the floor, the fate of the bill is already decided. So when you go up to the chamber, if you start booing or yelling or at people to vote one way or another, that horse has already left the barn. So the committee is where you want to do your work. The floor is those are all long shots to change a bill's trajectory on the floor. I will say that the process, if a House bill is introduced, it passes the House, it goes to the Senate amends it, it will come back to the floor of the original chamber for what's called a concurrence vote. Concurrence vote is just up or down, can't amend it at that point, whether you agree with the changes the other chamber made. If yes, the bill is ratified. If no, there's what's called a conference committee that is assigned, which is members of both chambers that get together to come out with what is a mutually acceptable version of the bill. That then goes back to the floor, both chambers, for just an up or down vote. And that process continues until either the bill is killed or they come to a language that is acceptable to both chambers. So remember, introduction, committee, floor vote, then it goes to the other chamber for the same thing. Introduction, committees, floor vote, and then back to the House of Origin. That's in very broad, rough terms. That is the legislative process in North Carolina. So how do we figure any of this out? So this is the North Carolina General Assembly website. It's ncleg.gov. This is a really powerful tool to be able to understand uh, where the bills are, who the people are going to be hearing the bills, review bill language, review vote totals. It's all right here. When I was a lobbyist and when I was a member of staff, this is where I would spend 90% of my time if I was researching legislation. You can see the legislative calendar, um, where it explains what committees are meeting, when committees are meeting, and where. They even have an option to stream live, so you can listen to to the committees as they happen. If you can't be in the building for some reason. A lot of these, the floor votes are recorded, so you can go to the streaming tab up there and see previous recordings on things. You can search for bills by number. You can search for bills by keyword. You can search for bills just in a normal term. You can look up various members of the House and Senate. You can see what their contact information is. You can find out where their office numbers are. So this is an invaluable tool to be able to tell, as either an advocate or a lobbyist, how to make sure that you're on top of things. So um, I can go over this in more detail, but effectively, everything is publicly available and it's all here. So let's take a moment and assume that you have a bill that you want to support. You've checked out, you've looked up the bill number. You've read what committee the bill is in. You've looked up that committee. You've determined when that committee is meeting. You looked up the membership of that committee, and you've said, okay, so these are the two or three members of the General Assembly that I want to go talk to about this legislation. What is the process of actually talking to a legislator to make sure that your views are represented or they know how you feel about this bill? So the most important thing when dealing with a legislator or dealing with really any kind of messaging is to think about not how you're going to talk about the bill. It's to think about how the person that you're trying to message is thinking about how you're messaging to them. I know that sounds a little bit confusing, so I have a handy little visual aid. So this is how you should conceptualize your discussions about policy. So when talking to a legislator, you want to consider how they view your interactions with them. So when we're talking about advocacy, we want the legislator to know how much that you care about a given subject and how much you know about a given subject. So when I worked in the governor's office, and then later when I was a lobbyist, I would always tell people we would get, and this is back in 2001, we would get form letters or online petitions, and we wouldn't know what to do with them because there was no way to check to see if somebody actually signed them, if there were a million Mickey Mouses or Donald Ducks on the online petition. We had no way to tell if the people that signed them were from North Carolina or they were real people. Um, so you want the legislator to understand the amount of effort you want to put in to the your communications and your advocacy, your messaging as a proxy for how much you care about the subject. So as you go up this pyramid, you fewer and fewer people are willing to put in that much effort, and that means more and more to the person that you're messaging to. So a letter to the editor, that could be important. That meant you spent some time to research where to send the email. You took a look at, see what the guidelines were for the letters of the editor. You cared enough about to craft that subject. But it means more to send a personalized email that is obviously not a form letter to your legislator because they know that you care about them. More than that is a handwritten letter because you sat down and put pen to paper and put a stamp on it. You found out what their legislative email address, snail mail address was, and you put that in the mail. Obviously, and additionally, typically handwritten letters or personalized emails are going to generate responses, which take up staff time, which require people to think about their policy positions, and also means that the person writing those letters is going to have something from a legislator that they can post online or they can talk about other people with. I sent my legislator a handwritten letter about how much I care about this subject, and they sent me back a generic form letter saying, thank you for your email. They don't care about me, they probably don't care about you, right? So the legislators want to avoid those sorts of things. So they want, as long as you tell them that you care, they're going to respond to you. Phone call, more important because that takes time. It takes time for you to call in and make sure that you call, that you know what the number is, that you know your talking points, and you care. And the highlight is, I drove down to Raleigh, even though I'm not from there. I paid for parking. I walked into the building. I found your office. I'd made an appointment, and I talked to you. That is the gold standard, because that is the thing that shows how much effort you're willing to put into interacting with the legislator. I'm going to have a caveat here and say, um, this is why it can be important to advocate, to when you're doing advocacy, to do it in conjunction with a larger organization, because the how the individual elements of this, whether a phone call is better or a handwritten letter is better, sometimes that can change a little bit based on your target, and it can help a larger and larger, more sophisticated organizations are going to know on a granular level which members are going to be most receptive to which forms of communication here. But as a general rule, you want to think about the how uh, the lawmaker is going to receive how you're choosing to structure your messaging, because this is what that looks like to the legislator. When you're at the top of the pyramid in terms of effort, you represent the most people below you on in terms of population. It's the old saying that every person that writes a complaint letter represents 10 or 50 or 100 people that have the complaint, didn't bother to write. That's how they're going to think about you. So if you spend the time to go and talk to to drive to Raleigh, to park, to walk into the office, to talk to them, that legislator knows that not only do you care about that issue, you're going to follow up. You're going to track to see how they vote on that, and then you're going to maybe campaign for their primary opponent in the next election, and you're going to give money based how they vote on that issue. If you bother to go and find a phone call and schedule time to call them, you're probably going to vote, and you're probably going to drive your friends to the poll, and you're going to tell them how you feel about that legislator when you do that. And you go all the way down the list to that guy on the street who like writes Mickey Mouse on the petition to get the guy to go away, who's wearing the vest that has, whatever the organization they're referring to. That person's not going to care. That person doesn't vote. So why should I listen to them? This is how the policymaker is going to think about you as an advocate based on the way you interact with them. So keep that in mind when you're structuring how you're going to talk to a legislator about an issue. So on that, different kinds of methodologies are going to require different approaches. So let's say that you're doing a one-on-one messaging, one-on-one meeting with either legislator or legislative staff. What you want to front in those conversations, that's about who. That's about who you are and what you're there to talk about. I'm a constituent. I'm a voter. I care very deeply about this issue or this bill, and I want my representative to vote for or against this piece of legislation or this policy. Because you're meeting with them face to face, you want to make it as personal as you possibly can. You want to focus on the message, you want to focus on you, and you want to focus on the relationship between yourself and the office. I'm a constituent, I'm a concerned voter, I live in this community, I really care. Now, that is a little bit different from if you're doing public speaking and say going to a committee and you're going to give testimony, or if you're in a town hall. So that is about the what. That is about what you are and the reason that those people should listen to you. I am an expert. I have lived in this town for 25 years. I have been a taxpayer in this area for my whole life. These are the reasons why I support or oppose this piece of legislation. And most importantly, I'm here and I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions. That lets them know that you care enough about this to stick around and you have the depth of knowledge to be able to answer questions about things. More on that in a moment. If you're writing a letter, it's all about the why. You're going to focus on the argument. You're going to have, I have thought deeply about this issue. These are my arguments that are based on persuasion and logic. And you want to be focused and concise and you want to follow journalistic rules. And I'll tell you a story here because when I was a lobbyist, we used to do things like write letters to the editor. And they're of much less use now than they used to be, but it can be used, sometimes it can be helpful to pass out photocopies of the letters to the editor to let people know, like, oh, this is a policy position that's important. And I wrote this great letter about a bill that we really wanted to pass. And I very persuasive and very well written, and I kept it under the word count for what the News and Observer recommended as a letter to the editor. And I mentioned at the closing in my conclusion that I hope they supported my bill, House Bill. I think it was 1150. They edited it for space, and they cut off the last paragraph that had the name of the bill number that I wanted them to support in the bill because I didn't follow general journalistic practice and front load all the most important information in my article because you lose a third of your readers for every paragraph it's a basic tenet of journalism. So uh, those are the kind of things you want to see in a letter. You want to follow. We have a guest. Yeah, we have to to follow those basic journalistic practices. So how you're communicating and your method of messaging is going to determine how you interact. I mean, this is just another way to be thoughtful about your conceptualization of your messaging. Some basic do's and don'ts. Obviously, you want to be prepared. You want to have your talking points. You want to introduce yourself. You want to establish your credentials. I'm a voter. I'm your constituent. I'm an expert in this. I've done this for a long time. Maybe you have a degree in this. Maybe you're talking about education and you're an English as a second language teacher and you want to highlight that when you're talking to somebody on the education committee. You want to establish what your credentials are. You want to share your story and you want to make your ask. When I say share your story, humans learn by narrative. That is how people think about things in terms of story. So when you're talking to somebody, when you're messaging, you want to make the story personal. And you want to have your ask. You want to say, I want you to support or oppose this bill. You want to be as specific as possible about what you're asking for. And you want to ask in single short things. You don't want to do, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, because then a legislator maybe you could choose, oh, I did X, so I did everything you asked me for. You want to be simple, direct, and concise. Finally, you want to be polite. You want to say thank you and you want to follow up. It takes nothing to be polite, and no matter how uh, odious you think their policy positions are otherwise, you need to be polite. I mentioned earlier, advocacy is all about building relationships. This is the most important. If you take nothing else, remember you're building a relationship with that legislator, and you can't build a relationship based on animosity. That just doesn't work. You don't want to shoot from the hip. Uh, you don't want to underestimate or antagonize the person you're talking to. If you're supposed to meet with a legislator and they can't, for whatever reason, you have to meet with staff, don't treat staff disrespectfully because you're disappointed you don't get to speak to the legislator. That undermines the goals of your messaging. You want to stay focused on your topic. You don't want to forget to say thank you. And most importantly, I don't want you to feel pressure to have all the answers. This is a trick that I learned early in my career. Um, People don't understand the power of I don't know. I don't know is a gift. If somebody asks you a question about your policy position and you don't have an answer, don't make an answer up. Say, you know what? I don't know, but I will find out and I will get back to you. That gives you an opportunity to follow up with that legislator to build that relationship based on trust and honesty. So if you don't have the answer to the question, never make an answer up because if you're wrong, that's a door that's closed forever. Say you don't know, say you'll follow up, then follow up with the answer that they've asked. That is a very important tool that you should always have in your toolbox is the ability to admit that you don't know something, but you'll find out and you'll follow up with them. So I'm going to take a brief moment here to talk a little about technology in advocacy. Um, when you're messaging, technology is really useful. Right now, this is an example of me messaging through technology. I'm talking to you in your home over a phone line or an internet connection. And hopefully this way I have amplified my voice. Same with Indivisible Wake County. They're amplifying their voice through these meetings, through email. Um, Use technology to coordinate, to plan, to research, to understand, to reach people, to refine your message and your messaging ability, and use social media to have more voices, the better. When you're actually doing advocacy, be as analog as possible because nothing useful in terms of advocacy happens behind a computer screen. Because again, technology is inherently labor saving, and we don't want to save labor. We want our effort fully on display. We want our effort as a proxy for how much we care and what we're willing to do for the issue that we're talking about. So get out behind the computer screen, get out on the street, get out to the General Assembly building, get out to their member's office, get out to a town hall. Do all of these things and do them in person because that is the way that you successfully message in terms of advocacy, is being there in person and creating that relationship between you and the person that you want to that you're interested in successfully advocating. So a few basic tips. I come from an animal welfare background. That meant I had a lot of interaction with a lot of people who ran shelters and did dog training. I found a lot of analogies that worked really, really well in terms of dog training. You saw my dog walk in here earlier and how to deal with legislators. So this is a brief uh, uh, method about how to train your policymaker. Just like any simple creature, consistency and repetition are the two most important things. So you want to be able to say this, have the same commands: sit, stay, heel. Say it once, have the dog do it. Same with legislators. You want to establish a consistent training routine. You want to use the same commands. You want to use the same cues with your policymaker whenever you're interacting with them so they know where you stand on a subject and there's no ambiguity there. You want to keep training sessions short. You don't want to exhaust the person that you're targeting. You don't want to draw things out because that can frequently, there are diminishing returns in terms of your interactions with your policymaker. So keep it short, keep it pithy, keep it on topic, and uh, try to prevent any frustration or anything that may seem like harassment. So you want to be the person that you want to have them recognize your voice when you call or recognize your signature when you write a letter, but you don't want to go on a list about, we need to watch this person because they are trying to follow me home when I leave the General Assembly building. So short training session. This is the most important one, and this is the one that all of us are the worst at. So positive reinforcement, reward desired behaviors. I don't know why we're not better at this because this is the easiest one. If they vote in the way that you like, write them up and tell them thank you. Call them up and tell them thank you. Just because they didn't always follow your position doesn't mean that you don't thank them when they do follow your position. Um, the 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 platonic ideal of this is Hillary Clinton and gay marriage, right? If you want to criticize Hillary Clinton for not always being for gay marriage, you missed the part where Hillary Clinton came out for gay marriage. You want to reward the behavior you want to see in the world. So if somebody has not always been on your side, but is on your side now, you don't want a criticism from them for them not being on your side before. You want to praise them for being on your side now. because that is that is how you train a legislator. Teach them that when they do the thing that you want them to do, that you're happy and you tell them that you're glad that they did that because why else would they want to be on your side? Reward positive behaviors. Finally, this takes a lot of patience. Be patient and understanding. Remember, these are simple creatures. You have to continue to have the same behaviors again and again and again throughout the training process to make sure that the training sticks and your messaging gets through. So, I hope that you have taken away some positive helpful clues from this. If I could take a moment, I would like to tell a very self-indulgent metaphor for what I think will hopefully crystallize a lot of what I've said tonight. So this is the General Assembly building. It is a very ugly building. It is the most confusing building in Raleigh. I have spent an inordinate amount of time in this building. It was built in the 60s. At the time it was created, it was one of the few separate buildings for a legislature. At that point, there still are House and Senate chambers in the state capitol. They're small and cramped. This was really designed as a way to have a more professional General Assembly. They all had their own offices, they all had their own staff. But it is a building that was built in the 60s, and you can really tell. It's small, it's kind of gray inside, it's cramped. I spent a lot of time here. See that little pyramid on the top there? That's the chamber from which you sit to watch. That's the observation deck where you see into the chambers where votes are going on. I have spent probably in the last 25 years, probably measure that time of my life in months that I've spent up on that in that third floor, looking down to keep track of votes and watch the process. And this is kind of a ground view. I used to actually, when I would work for the governor's office, my office was right across the street. So I'd walk across. This was the view that I would see every day as I walked across. There are these big columns that run all the way around the legislative building. And I was walking up one day, and again, spending a lot of time on the third floor. I'm very invested with the health of these columns, holding the building up because, I don't want it to fall down while I'm in it. And I walked up one day and I saw a maintenance worker working on one of the columns. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why would a maintenance guy have to like inspect the marble columns out in front of the building? And the guy took a tool and he popped off the front of the column. And lo and behold, there's a big wooden post in there. There's a 4x4 that's actually underneath that. That's a facade uh, uh, that's hiding the actual structural piece of wood that's holding up that third floor of the building. And I went like, my God, this is the perfect metaphor for the North Carolina General Assembly. Because the office is that marble facade. It looks great. It's imposing. It looks as nice as a column is possible to work. But that piece of wood inside is the thing that's actually doing the work. And as much respect that marble facade engenders, if it's hiding uh, a structural problem, if it's hiding rot, then it's not only not doing its job, it's actually hurting things. And so as I finish my presentation, I'd like to finish it with a call to action because it's your job and it's my job to be the person that underpaid guy standing out in the ladder in the hot sun with a tool that's popping the front off the facade off these columns and looking at the inside and making sure that the thing that's inside is actually doing the job that it's supposed to do. That it's preventing rot or it's preventing cracks or it's preventing um, a structural anomaly that's not going to work. And I used to tell people when I was in charge of the intern program that democracy is not a spectator sport, that everybody's got to be involved. And the most important person in this process is that worker who's in the hot sun, who didn't even get a chance to decide what they were going to do that day, who's probably not getting paid enough, whose job it is to do the work, to check out, to make sure that the whole facade doesn't fall down around them. And that's the thing I want to leave you with, that you are the worker, that is your responsibility. That is all of our responsibilities collectively and individually to make sure that the thing that we need is actually doing the work that it's supposed to be doing, despite the fact that it looks pretty behind a big marble column. All it is at the end of the day is a big hunk of wood. So go out and check for rock, people. So that's the end of my presentation.